Hello, good crowd. I am so excited. My cousin from prison recommended our next guest, Michael Santos. He's the director of programs at Resilient Courses. Formerly incarcerated individual himself, he's working with people who are in prison or are getting out to help them have better experiences, especially after prison. So, fascinating discussion coming. You don't want to miss this episode. Stick around.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Our sponsor, Johnson & Johnson, matches most individual donations up to $250 at caringcrowd.org. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to learn more about your work, but I was so impressed when my cousin reached out to me from prison to tell me that he'd been listening to your podcast and how much they were influencing his life and attitude in prison, which can be so difficult. Tell us a little bit about the breadth of your work with prisoners today.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Michael. I'm a guy who made a lot of bad decisions as a young man. I was 20 years old when I thought it would be kind of fun to traffic in cocaine, and it turned out to be a really bad decision. By the time I was 23, I was arrested by federal authorities and locked in prison and facing a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. I made some bad decisions even at the earliest stages after my arrest, where I should have been accepting responsibility and working toward reconciling with society for the bad decisions that I had made. Instead, I pleaded not guilty. I went to trial. I perjured myself on the stand. And it was while during that awkward stage between conviction and sentencing, that I just had this change of mindset. I was exposed to the work of Socrates, and that work completely changed my life. And it influenced the way I served 9,500 days in prison. I concluded that sentence after 26 years in federal prison in August of 2013, and immediately embarked upon this strategy of working to teach and inspire other people in prison. And I've created a series of courses and digital programs that are now available on, as you said, Resilient Courses, that we make available to people in prison across the United States or people who are going into the system. And it effectively shows the power of a values-based, goal-oriented life, and how if we visualize success, create a plan, put priorities in place, and then execute that plan, we can emerge successfully, just like I'm sure many of your listeners adhere to. We're just learning it a little late in the game.
Well, there's so much to drill down on here. Obviously, your experience is interesting, but I want to quickly move past that and talk a little bit about what you teach people at the stage of, at the earliest stages of their encounters with the criminal justice system. So that they've been caught, perhaps they're out on bail even. At that stage of the game, what are you teaching people and defense attorneys?
Well, I'm glad that you asked at that stage, because there are different stages and different messages that we would give to somebody depending on where they are and depending on their backgrounds, because all of us are human beings and we go through this process at different times in our life, sometimes through conscious choices and sometimes through happenstance. But if it's an individual that at the stage that you just described, somebody that is just got caught or is out on bail, we would be talking with him about the importance of preparing for sentencing, because that if you've just got caught, there's a very good chance that you are going to be convicted and that you are going to face a sentencing hearing. And a lot of times people want to be in denial and live with this mindset that they didn't do something wrong or that their attorney is going to get them off. And if that's the case, they tend to dig themselves deeper and miss an opportunity to influence the judge or to influence their family members and their attorneys, and they make bad decisions that can exacerbate their problems. That is, in fact, what happened to me. I got caught, I didn't get the right messaging, and I lived in denial, and as a result of that, my sentence was measured in multiple decades, where I likely had made better, had I made better decisions, I likely would have served much less. So I try to communicate with them the facts of the system, what they can expect, and how they can recalibrate their lives at that stage and start positioning themselves for a better outcome.
That is all important messaging. And as then people are post-sentencing, and let's focus for a minute on people like my cousin who are in prison for a stretch. How do you coach them to cope with that? I mean, it must be so daunting to be thinking about spending a decade or more, maybe decades, maybe the rest of your life in prison. How do you coach them?
So I try to teach the wisdom that I learned from other leaders that have encountered struggle. I think that one of the unifying factors in all of us as human beings is that we all face struggle and challenges in our life. And it's incumbent upon each of us to work toward recalibrating and putting ourselves on a better pathway. And that can happen whether somebody is in prison or somebody is outside of prison. I teach what I learned. I teach the story of how I learned. And that was, I said, by reading Socrates. In fact, it was the story of the Crito when Socrates was in prison himself that gave me a different mindset. And I've stopped thinking about the world as it exists, where the world that I'm living in with all the pressures and the challenges, but instead think about what I am striving to become, what I can change, what I can influence. And if I focus on my own power within, I can create a life of meaning and relevance and contribution. And I can do that from inside of a prison, whether I'm serving multiple decades or whether I'm overcoming some other type of struggle. I think that these are universal lessons that I first learned from Socrates, but as time went on, I learned from many other leaders, including Viktor Frankl, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, so many. But they all have kind of a unifying message that we as human beings are resilient and we can create our own pathways to success as we define it if we learn how to think differently.
Obviously, most people who go to prison leave prison at some point and have a new opportunity at life. Recidivism is a big problem in many places. I think it's almost a universal problem within the United States, at least. How do you coach people to cope with their release from prison? That can be as challenging as anything else they've faced.
I really believe that it's never too early and it's never too late to begin preparing for success. If we get that person at the earliest stage of the journey, we can help start seeding a record that will give him strength, courage, and confidence that he can overcome the challenges that he's going to encounter upon release. But if we counter somebody that has just been released and is struggling in the halfway house, I still strive to have him look at his life in 5 years. What does he want it to be? Where does he want to live? What does he want to do with his life? What does he want to do with his career? And then I would do the same thing that I've learned from other leaders and that's try to reverse engineer your pathway. If I can define success in my life 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I know what I need to be doing, where I need to be in 2 years or 3 years or 1 month or next week. And then I can begin asking a series of critical thinking type questions that says, well, what am I doing today that's going to advance me along that path? I certainly, I think one of the advantages I have in communicating that message is because I was in for 26 years, I can remove a lot of excuses from people. I mean, I came back to society with a 000 credit score and very little experience. The internet didn't exist when I went in. YouTube didn't exist. Emails didn't exist. Zoom certainly didn't exist. So I had to learn everything immediately, and I could show that within a couple of years, I was productive. In fact, within days, I was productive. But again, I got started much earlier. So if I encounter somebody wherever they are, the first question I'm going to ask is, how do you define success? Let's put a timeline on it. And then let's reverse engineer our way there.
One of the things that my cousin pointed out to me about your message that resonated with him, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said, which was paraphrasing you, so you may not even recognize the message. I apologize if that's the case. But he said that it resonated with him, your message that he shouldn't adopt the prison mentality and the prison look, but that he should seek to look and act like someone who is not in prison and to be ready in part for the after prison. Do you remember saying anything like that?
Oh, that's the essence of my message. There is really a myth in every jail and prison across the country that the best way to serve time is to forget about the world outside and just focus on your prison reputation. And what that does is it influences the way people talk, the way that they walk, the way that they dress, the look on their face. If you bump into somebody, you might say, excuse me, I didn't mean to bump into you. In prison, the response might be, watch your back. And it's just that mentality that results in you learning how to live in prison, but simultaneously you're learning skills that are going to result in you failing when you come out. And so I go into prisons and speak regularly or several times a year. And the irony is when I walk in there like you are in a suit and tie, and people see me and they don't really believe that I was in prison. And I tell them, you think you're giving me an insult by saying I was never in prison, or because I don't look hard enough or I don't sound like it. But I always tell them that was the plan, that I would be able to come back to society, put on a suit and tie, and nobody would know I served a day in prison unless I told them. And that's what I try to get them to think in that mindset. So I'm glad that your cousin got that message. And I hope that more people get that message.
As you think about this, you have repeatedly said your message applies to everyone, that we all face challenges that we could compare to a prison sentence. Some of them are long, some of them are short. But let's talk about people who have no connection to the criminal justice system for just a minute, and talk about, because you spend a lot of your time speaking to those audiences as well. How do you adapt your message for that audience so that it resonates with them?
Well, I always am truthful and authentic in the sense I tell my story, that, you may want to discount it because I was in prison for 26 years, but then I follow that up by saying, since I've been home, I've encountered people that never went into the criminal justice system, but they seem to live in a prison that's far more confining than I ever experienced. And it's because of the way they look at life. I don't take credit and say this is my message. This is a message that I learned from leaders, and those leaders frequently had nothing to do with the prison system. Leaders like Steve Jobs, who would say that a good artist copies ideas, but a great artist steals ideas. I stole ideas from leaders, and I can tell you that people outside who have faced a financial reversal can feel like they're in prison. And if they don't learn the strategy to get out, they are going to be stuck in that prison. People outside who have struggled through divorce or the loss of a child or obesity or substance abuse, all of that can feel imprisoning. And I definitely believe that if they learn these same strategies that leaders taught me, they can become resilient. They can overcome. And I tell them these are the strategies that work for me. And I respond openly and honestly and try to disrupt this mindset that a struggle is lifelong. It's only as long as we are willing to allow it to burden us.
Michael, you've been through some difficult things. You've accomplished some incredible things in the relatively few years since you left prison. What are you most proud of having accomplished?
So one of the weird statistics in society, I think, is that most marriages, don't even last a few years or 5 or 6 years. I got married inside of a prison visiting room in 2003 when I still had 10 more years of imprisonment to go. And was able to nurture a relationship with an amazing woman, build a life with her while I was in prison, generate financial resources from within prison, and totally support her financially so that she could go to school and become a nurse and a master's educated nurse. And now to have been free from prison for just over 6 years, where we have been to get married now for 17 years and have built a number of businesses together. And I think I'm most proud of being able to build a marriage that has lasted longer than most people that started their lives outside. We weren't together for the first 10 years of our marriage, and we're still very strong and happy.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You've given us a lot of great insights, but as you think back on your experiences, your research, your reading, the training you do, the courses you've prepared, what is the single most important lesson you've learned?
I think the most important lesson I learned is to always believe in yourself, to recognize that regardless of what struggle you're going through, there's going to be more coming, but there's always a pathway through. And the path that I continuously return to is to live a values-based, goal-oriented life. If I can define success by the values that are important to me, I can set very clear goals that are consistent with those values. And if I can execute a plan every single day, putting priorities first, I can overcome struggle. And yeah, I've gone through 26 years in prison, and I've built businesses outside that some would construe as being very successful, but it doesn't mean I don't continuously go through struggle. And it's always that pattern that I learned that carries me through and that I try to share with others.
Now, you've been extremely effective, it seems, in not only creating a message, but delivering a message. Again, I go back to my cousin feeding me a recommendation to have you on the show. Clearly, not only did you prepare a message that would resonate with him, but you got the message to him, which is tricky, right? Getting content like that into prison must have been difficult. Plus, you're sharing it elsewhere. I'm impressed. But why did you want to do that? Among all the things you could have done to make a living and take care of yourself, why the focus on helping other prisoners?
I think that all of us as human beings have a responsibility to work toward making society better. And certainly as somebody who was incarcerated for so long and who benefited in so many ways from leaders like, as I said, Socrates or Mandela or so many other people who taught me, I want to share that message with as many people in prison as I possibly can. I think that our nation's commitment to mass incarceration is really one of the greatest social injustices of our time. And in order to change it, I've got to really live the message that I learned from one of my other mentors, Gandhi. You said, be the change you want to see in the world. And I want to see more people coming out of prison and not living a life of mediocrity and poverty and struggle, but one of prosperity and abundance and happiness. And so I have to show them the strategies that worked for me. And as a result, as a fact that I served so much time, I think that people like your cousin might be more willing to listen to me because they identify with the message and they recognize that I obliterate all excuses. I was in high security prisons, medium security prisons, low security prisons, and minimum security camps. And regardless of where I was, I lived this message and I built a record to document it, always with an intention of teaching and inspiring others who are in struggle, whether they're in prison or in school or in business, because we all face struggle. And I really believe that there's a strategy that we can use to power through.
Michael, what is your superpower?
My superpower is interesting. I guess I got to say it's listening to my wife and knowing when to slow down some, because I have a tendency to go 24 hours a day, and she keeps me grounded and helps me think better.
That's great. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Before you go, I want you to take a minute or two and tell people how they can connect with you on social media, how they can get your books, how they can take your courses. Don't leave anything out. Take a minute or two and tell people how they can access you.
That's very kind, and I'm really open and transparent. My name is Michael Santos, and I, of course, have a website at michaelsantos.com that is more of my commercial website, where I really document the journey of how I have used the strategies that I learned in prison to build businesses and raise capital, and what I am doing and how I'm still living this 5-year plan and always on this 5-year plan. My other product, my newest one, which I'm super excited about, is resilientcourses.com, where I am creating this type of digital content for people that cannot afford to hire our team. We give away a lot of content for free that teaches people how to prepare for if they're going into the criminal justice system or regardless of what stage they're in. It's not only for people going into the system, but it's for their family members as well. So, but I think a Google search of just my name, Michael Santos, makes me pretty easy to find. I've got an extensive LinkedIn presence, and I would love to connect with any of your listeners that are interested in learning more.
Fantastic. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in the important work that you're doing to help prisoners become more productive citizens and have a better experience in prison.
Well, Devin, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to connect with your impressive audience. I want to say that I also want to congratulate you on producing nearly, I guess it's going to be 1,200 shows, which is really quite a feat. I know it was an incredible commitment of time, and I wish you success in the next venture on your journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's do some good.
Awesome. Thanks.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
Thanks for tuning in to the Your Mark on the World show, the Social Impact Podcast. Please subscribe via YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify.